Welcome back to Review Crew. I'm Roman.
And I'm Gabe. On today's episode, we're going to review Drive My Car. Bina and Matt are going on the spot to review Turning Red.
Here's the trailer for Drive My Car.
妻です。僕たちは確かに僕が一番恐れていたのは音を失うことだった。
今回は私たちの決まりでドライバーを用意します。
というと、
彼女です。
渡美咲です。
僕はまだドライバーを君に頼むことに同意してない。
私が若い女だからですか
？1ヶ月半の稽古と2週間の本番です。
ずるい人だ。
拜托。
そこまで。失礼。君はどうして広島に？
実家の裏が山なんです。大雨で地滑りが起きて、母はその事故で亡くなったんです。
お父さんって素敵じゃないですか、とても。
君はこう考えてる。僕たちは同じ悲しみを共有してる。同じ女を愛したから。僕の人生と愛はどうしたらいい？
生きていくほかないの。
私の方がおじさんよりずっと不幸かもしれない。それでも私はやけなんか起こさない。
だから今毎日とても楽しいです。
So, Roman, how you doing today, man?
I just watched Drive My Car for this review, so I hurt.
Yeah, this is a... Drive My Car is an emotionally devastating film, and we're going to get into a lot of the reasons why. But one of the reasons we wanted to review it is because it was nominated for Best Picture at this year's Oscars. First off, do you think this movie was worthy of that nomination?
Absolutely, 110%. This movie's great. I mean, I am emotionally devastated now, but in the best possible way. It was, one of those moments I closed my laptop and was like, this is the right kind of pain to be feeling. Yeah, it was a fantastic movie.
Yeah, a lot of the films that I feel were nominated for this year's Best Pictures, especially Power of the Dog, are these reflections on grief. And this film is most definitely also in that vein. So it was nominated for Best Picture. Do you think there's any chance this film wins?
I think so, because it's a movie about people in the creative business, and you can never underestimate Hollywood and especially the Academy's abilities to give awards to things that talk about Hollywood or people who are screenwriters and stuff like that. But this time around, this is a movie about writers that I actually think really deserves the praise. It's not just that, the Academy is like, oh, look, people like us.
Yeah, I think it's going to definitely get a lot of the favor that Mank got, kind of about, how it's about the creative process and the limitations that our grief kind of puts on it. I personally would be surprised if it won, but I wouldn't be angry, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, not at all.
I think it's deserving of a win, but I think we got, we're so spoiled with how many good movies we got this year. So I don't think it's going to win, but I'd love to be surprised. Now, Drive My Car is directed by Ryusuke Higuchi, and it is an adaptation of a short story. And essentially, it's about a man who is dealing with a lot of grief from the death of his wife and the circumstances around it. And so we see him kind of create this nebulous friendship with this girl who's driving him around. And there's this, when it says Drive My Car, we're referring to this red Saab 900 Turbo. That is just this, first off, it's a beautiful car.
Beautiful car.
And it's a beautiful setting for this film. This is a very contained film. You're not getting many set pieces, but it's a very enclosed sanctuary type film. Do you kind of want to talk about the evolution of the plot and what do you think it meant for you?
Yeah, and you mentioned it's adapted from a short story, which is amazing because this movie is anything but short. It is 3 hours long. And
178 minutes, yeah.
And it flows so smoothly. You forget that you're watching a 3-hour movie. I mean, this plot, smooth is really the best way to describe how it evolves. So we start off learning about the trauma in this guy's life, and we actually get the title scene about
40 minutes in.
40 minutes into the movie, which I mean, it's remarkably well paced. And as things unfold, it's just such a natural. I'm trying not to give too much away because you really don't want spoilers
I agree
for
with
this
you.
one.
The essence of this movie is the journey, and I think this journey is something you should save to be seen. But I think some of the basic details we can give is that this is about an adaptation of Anton Chekhov's Uncle Vanya that this man is staging. It's a multilingual staging, and that tends to really extrapolate the theme that we're going to get to soon. But one of the cool things about this movie is just how many languages it's in. You've got Japanese, Mandarin, German, Korean Sign Language, English, I think there's a little bit of French at one point. And so you would think that with this very Tower of Babel, all these languages presented, you think it would be confusing, but at no point did this movie make you not understand what's happening. I don't want to say that this isn't an art house film, and there are aspects of it that a lot of people are going to consider pretentious, but I think these emotional themes are pretty universal. Do you kind of want to touch on that theme of grief?
Yeah, and also building off what you said about it being an art house film, I think this is the perfect type of movie like this, and art house, if you use that word, that you don't have to be a fan of these type of movies.
Yeah.
You don't have, this requires no mental labor on your part. Like, if you're a person who likes good stories, which is probably all of us, you're going to get something out of this movie. It's not made for film people. This is a really accessible movie. It's really good, and that theme of grief is so relatable to everyone and is explored so powerfully in this movie. I mean, just from the beginning to the end of the movie, you really do see the characters, and not just one of them, pretty much everyone in this movie go through all stages of grief.
Yep.
And it's really fantastic, and it's really done the perfect mix of subtly, but not so subtle that you can't understand it and you're like, wait a minute, am I getting this right? For a movie like this, that's really like down to earth and maybe could have been alienating to mainstream audiences, I don't think it is at all. I think it's completely watchable by anyone, and you're gonna get a lot out of it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. I think the fact that it's on HBO Max means there's no real reason not to watch this. It's accessible. There's subtitles for every language, and they even use different fonts. So maybe people who, struggle with interpreting certain things, there's different fonts for each language, so you can tell what's being said. Kind of touching on that theme of grief, this is a movie about deconstruction. And so while it's deconstructing these characters, we see Yusuke grappling with the death of his wife and the circumstances around it and some of the pain she's caused him and the duty he held in her death. There's certain actions he could have taken that he didn't, and maybe if he would have done it, she would have been alive. None of these are spoilers. This is all right before the opening credits. But it's kind of interesting to note that while this movie is deconstructing these characters, at least for me, I felt like it was deconstructing myself. I have nothing in common with a Japanese man who is staging a play of Anton Chekhov, but I felt like I related to this character. I felt like this movie was pulling out the parts of me that I don't want to think about, and it kind of makes you look at them in a new light, and that's what it does with these characters. A man has to grapple with his wife's infidelity, and that's a really ugly thing, but it frames it in such a beautiful way that this film just makes you question these ideas of grief and loss. But we're going to get right back to these themes of grief and loss after we take a little pit stop in our review of Drive My Car.
So far we've really talked about the plot, the themes, really those elements of it. But this movie is pretty much great on all cylinders. And one thing that I'm really impressed with in this movie is the acting. I mean, not just the leads, the supporting cast of this movie is phenomenal. One actor really stood out to me was the woman who speaks with Korean Sign Language. I looked her up on IMDb. This was her sole IMDb film credit, and she's fantastic, just an amazing actor. And the acting in this movie is great, and for a movie like this where there's not that many major plot points, it's what you're really going to be invested in is the feeling of how you're getting from point to point. The acting needs to be amazing, and it's just as good as it needs to be, if not better.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. This is a very cinema verite style film where we're getting kind of a slice of life. We're in these moments in the car, and so that could be boring. And like we said, this is a 3-hour movie, but it's not, because the way these characters interact with each other, you're kind of drawn to it. Our driver, Watari, she is this girl with a very troubled, painful past, but she walks this line of also, the way she treats this man who's also broken. She's very kind to him. And so she's made bad decisions, but she moves forward with this. And you're talking about the actress who used Korean Sign Language. I thought it was awesome, the representation of having someone who's mute. I love to see that in films, and I think that's something excellent that they did. Because, you can have amazing films, amazing acting, you can have an amazing story, but if you don't have amazing actors to relay those themes, it's not going to matter. And so I definitely agree with you. This is a film about acting, and the actors in it do an excellent job. And it's especially difficult because this is it's about a film. It's a film about a play, and so these characters have to have several layers because, in a lot of ways, it's a metaphor for the story of Uncle Vanya by Anton Chekhov. And another thing that I love besides the acting is just the screenplay that this story comes from. It's adapted by a Harumi short story. It was nominated also for Best Screenplay, and that's one that I could definitely see it winning, because everything said in this film feels like a Rupi Kaur poem. Like, just these phrases have just so much meaning in them. And like we said, a lot of this movie is about deconstruction. And so the lines in it just beg you to rip them apart and analyze the meaning behind it. What were some other things about this film that you really liked?
I mean, one thing that always impresses me in a movie like this, in one of these movies people might consider an Oscar movie or something like that, is that this movie is not going for the showboat angle. They're not trying to wow you with oh my God, how'd they get that camera work? The camera work and things like that are amazing, but in a way that's silent to the viewer. There is fantastic shot composition in this, but all in a way that serves the story. You're never going to be taken out of the film by someone just showing off their talents for the purpose of showing off their talents. And now, of course, we've seen movies like, for example, Baby Driver, where that could be really cool. That could be something where you're it's fun for the audience, but that would be out of place in this movie, and they don't do it. Everything and everyone that contributed to this was doing it for the sole purpose of serving the overall narrative, and it's just fantastic. The great things about this movie are, in many ways, silent. You're just going to enjoy them and appreciate them passively, and that's just so impressive to me.
As far as Oscar movies go, I kind of think there's a spectrum, and it's from 1917 to Drive My Car. And they are as far as apart as you can get. This movie is not trying to wow you with its technical things. It's not trying to wow you with explosions or loud noises. In a way, it speaks through the silence. Now, I have to ask you, I want to get to setting. Do I have your permission to be slightly pretentious for a second?
You have my full permission to be pretentious.
So, my favorite thing about this movie is the fact that it's set in Hiroshima, Japan. And now we all know the the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima, the fact that it was a city that was completely razed. But as we see in the movie, this is a thriving city. They've rebuilt. And there's so much of the character's journey in that city of Hiroshima. We saw a man who grief tore to the ground. This man went through stuff, without giving spoilers, he went through stuff that I can't even comprehend how that pain would feel. And yet, slowly, he rebuilds. He finds a way to express himself through his art. There's a really interesting couple of scenes, actually, in this movie where he's using these quotes from Uncle Vanya to voice his own emotions. And like we said, this is a movie about creativity. And I think there's this, I don't want to say secret, but it's a deep underlying theme about grief can be vanquished through expressionism, through creativity. And I think that's a really important thing to say. And I think it's awesome that the Academy recognized that, because, you know, in times like these, when, you know, there's so much grief in the world, it's nice to be able to think of ways that we can kind of fight against that. Is that a theme that you also noticed?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this whole movie, almost everyone's character arc is about overcoming some sort of grief or personal struggle. It's all about characters overcoming, you know, an issue within their mind that they have chosen not to address and are now coming around to that. But we could talk about this all day, and we definitely could and probably will at some point off camera, but we gotta get a number, which this is one of those times where you almost don't want to give a number, but
yeah. So for me personally, I don't know how to score this in comparison to other films, because I have nothing to compare this to. So I'm going to say that for what Drive My Car is, it's a 10 out of 10. Whoever's driving this car is doing it extremely smoothly, because it put me on an emotional journey that I didn't know I needed. I don't know how to rank it in comparison to other films, but for what it is, it's a masterpiece. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I'm always hesitant for 10 because, you know, it's hard to say after you just saw something, but I don't have any holes to poke in this. Like, I mean, so to me, if there's going to be a number, it's going to be a 10. So drive my car. It has the double 10s from us. So.
Double 10s. We will race right back after this break. That's all for this week. If you want to follow more Review Crew content, go to the Review Crew Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, as well as Orange TV Network on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, and YouTube.
Find the Review Q's podcast on Spotify or on our website at orangetvnetwork.syr.edu, where you can also find our blog and more OTN information.
Check out this week's screening hosted by University Union and Kanto. Also, be sure to check out Friday Night Movie Night on OTN. This week's movies are Father's Little Dividend, Attack of the Giant Leeches, and Little Shop of Horrors.
See you next week.